Hello.
Hi,
Hey,
hello
Alyssa.
everyone. Good evening for the those of you in I don't know what time zone are we in? Over near the Americas, I guess, and then good morning for those of you near Sacha Greif's part of the world and everywhere in between because I know there's lots of people who stay up late. Welcome, welcome. Oh my
Yeah, hello,
goodness.
everybody. My name is TJ Van Tol. I work as a developer advocate at Progress. With me,
Yeah.
Alyssa.
Hi, Alyssa Nykel, also a developer advocate at Progress. I love all things Angular and UI and CSS. TJ is more on the React side of the fence, but I don't think either of us. I don't know. We both just love JavaScript and love this community. We could not be more excited to have a release party with all of you beautiful people for the State of JavaScript survey that just dropped for the 2020 results. So.
Yeah, and so just to sort of set the stage for what we're going to be doing today, we've got a great group of people here to talk about the State of JavaScript survey. So I just want to mention two things at the top. First of all, Alyssa and I both work for Progress, and we are actually giving away a handful of prizes as part of this stream. So if you're interested, check out, there's going to be a link in the chat that you can go and put in basically some basic contact information that we just need to contact the winners. So if you're interested in entering for some prizes, we have some Amazon gift cards we're giving away and a few other things as well. Go through and do that. And if you miss it, we'll be dropping the link in the chat throughout today's stream. And essentially, we're going to start by bringing on Sacha here in a second to talk about the survey itself. And then we've got a handful of other guests that are going to be joining us in a bit to go further than that. Am I missing anything, Alyssa, or are we good to kick the ball
Don't
rolling here?
think so. I don't think so. I think we're ready to bring Sasha on. So let's welcome our guest of honor for the party this afternoon, this evening, this morning, wherever you are at. Sasha Greif to the stage, everyone.
Hi,
Hey.
everybody. Thanks for having me today.
Hey.
My
Thanks so
goodness.
much for organizing this.
Oh
It's
my
really
goodness.
cool. I'm really
It is
excited to be part of it.
literally an honor to get to host the party stream for this survey. I've been a huge fan for years. And now I get to pick your brain about how you did it. I'm so excited. So thank you, Sasha, for agreeing to do this and for organizing and everything that you do in the community in between. So we really appreciate you.
Yeah, could you start by giving just a little bit of introduction to who you are? Because I think a lot of people don't know the actual people behind this survey that goes out every year.
Sure. So my name is Sacha Greif. I'm a developer. I guess I'm a independent, like developer slash entrepreneur slash designer. I've done a lot of things. Well, one of them is that survey, which has been running for 4 years now, since 2016. So this is the fifth edition. The other half of the team is Raphael Benit, who is, by the way, we both live in Japan and we're both French and JavaScript developers. So we kind of found each other. Like we had a
Wait,
lot
did you know him before like
we
everything?
met at the local coding meetup here in Japan. And yeah, it was pretty cool to discover we had so much like common interest and really complementary skill sets. So he has a database library for React called Nevo, and he's like the data manipulation expert, and he's also like a really good designer and developer. But I guess the first year I did it mostly by myself, and then the second year we found each other, and then since then it kind of clicked, and we've been able to try and iterate and do things at a bit of a larger scale year after year.
I
And
have to ask, did you ever see it getting this big whenever you first started out, like creating it?
yeah, I guess so. I was
I
hoping it
love
would. Yeah.
it. That's awesome. So
Um,
whenever you first created it, like what gave you the idea or even the drive to want to create a survey for this?
well, I really created it for myself. So my personal like history as a developer, I used to be more of a designer actually for a long time. I actually did like, I was in Photoshop doing freelance design work, and I wasn't writing a single line of code. But I did have a background as a developer as well. So eventually I went back into development and started doing both. And at that time, I started using Meteor.js, the Meteor framework, and I got super involved in that community. But eventually, I could see the JavaScript ecosystem outside of that little like bubble was still evolving. So I wanted to catch up on that. And I found it super confusing because Meteor is kind of this all-in-one approach where you kind of get your view layer, backend, it's all in one box. And when you come out of that and you have to figure out, okay, am I going to use React or Angular or Vue? Am I going to use GraphQL or REST? I was super confused myself. And so that was the impulse for the survey initially, like just answer my own questions about which technology to use, especially because my experience, not just with Meteor, but with other technologies, was that if you just look at the popularity in terms of raw usage, it can be misleading, right? Because, Backbone, let's say, is going to be used way more than Svelte today. But then if somebody asked me which one to use, I would probably recommend Svelte over Backbone, right? Just because it's more recent, it's more modern, and people are happier with it. So that's the key thing that I thought other surveys and other stats weren't measuring was satisfaction with the tools people are using. And so that was the impulse, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's kind of like one thing that I found interesting and kind of unique about your survey. Did you get that inspiration from somewhere else, or was that just something you came up with on your own? Because like off the top of my head, I can't think of any other, at least in the like technology space, survey that's like the primary thing you surface, right? Do people like using it? Not just whether you use it, but that's what you weight. That's sort of what you default to. So I'm curious where that idea came from.
It feels like, looking back, it feels like I came up with it, but maybe I'm just forgetting where I got the idea. I'm sure I'm not the first one to do it, but yeah, it was something I at least felt was missing. So yeah.
So I'm dying to ask, what is the survey built with? What is it like? How did you build it? What did it evolve over the years? Is it the same platform and same site that you just upgraded, or how?
Oh, wow. Do you have an hour? Yeah, it's well, it's not that complex, but we basically have three pieces of the stack. We have initially we were using a Typeform, which is like a survey app like Google Forms or SurveyMonkey or whatever. So we were using that to collect the data, but we eventually ran into like their limitations because it's not really made for this kind of long form survey. And so last year, we built our own data collection platform using a framework called Vulkan.js, which is another one of my projects, like a full stack framework based on React and Meteor. So I use that to build a data collection app, which is the first part of the stack. So that's what people interact with when they actually fill out the survey. Then that data gets saved into a Mongo database. And on top of that, we have a GraphQL API. So that's a separate node app that only serves the API. And yeah, Mongo is probably not the best choice for that, but that's what Vulkan worked with. And we were like time constrained. So we just decided just to go with that. And it does have a decent aggregation framework to kind of generate those results. So it works. But then once we have the GraphQL API, we then send that data to a Gatsby app. And that's what people, that's what you see when you browse the results. So that's Gatsby. So it's kind of it's a bit fragmented, but at the same time, it's three very different tasks. So it probably makes sense to separate them out like that.
Cool. Well, I know I have a lot of questions as well, but I also do want to give a quick shout out to just if you're in chat and you have any questions that you want to bring up, feel free to drop those in. So Alyssa and I are both going to be watching that, so we'll be able to run some questions by Sacha and the rest of the panel here in a minute. And I know my next question is, I'm kind of curious how you sort of, I think one of the things that makes this survey so successful is you get a lot of people to fill it out, right? Like no survey is good if 5 people fill it out, no one cares. So I'm kind of curious your effort behind that, and kind of especially in the early days, because I think some of it, there's some momentum effect, right? As you sort of build up, but how do you initially get people to actually participate in this?
I think initially we got a good boost from Hacker News and Reddit and networks like that. I think, I'm not sure exactly, but I think we got around 8 or 9,000 responses the first year we did it, which is already huge. Like
Yeah.
this year we got 23,000, which is, it's more obviously, but it's not like an order of magnitude more. So we were already reaching a big part of that community the first time around. And I think it's probably because there was a real need for something like that. There was a real demand. Besides that, I've always done a lot of blogging, especially like guest blogging, writing on sites like CSS Tricks, Smashing Magazine. So I did that a lot in the beginning. Reaching out to people, like Peter Cooper, who runs JavaScript Weekly, Chris Collier, who runs CSS Tricks. So those people have been hugely helpful as well in getting the word out. But yeah, I mean, it's always, so my thinking on this has evolved a little bit, because in the beginning I was only considering like, okay, let's reach out to as many people as possible. But now we're also very conscious of who we reach out to, and the demographics, I guess, making sure everybody is represented as within our means, within what we can do, because it's a hard problem. But that's actually an ongoing concern that people raise, and that's valid, but also that we take very seriously. So our goal going forward is not just, okay, let's keep reaching more and more people. Of course, we do want to do that, but also let's make sure that we reach out to communities that feel minoritized within the programming population, whether it's people of color, women, and so on, or even like non-English speaking people. So I mentioned that because that's something people were bringing up on Twitter, and I wanted to make sure I addressed that concern.
Yeah, because you actually offer the survey in a lot of different languages now, correct?
Yeah, so this year we spent a lot of time making sure our platform could support different languages, and then we had a bunch of really awesome translators, like volunteer translators, contribute translations for the questions, because like I mentioned, there's like 3 parts of the stack, so it's a bit complex. Some of the content is only in the questions, some of it is in both the questions and the results, some of it only in the results. So figuring out the right way to manage all of that wasn't super straightforward. But I think we kind of have a working system now, and people have been super helpful.
You have some fans of your of the climbing wall in the background.
Cool.
And also some fans of the survey in general. So
awesome. Thanks, Fabricio. Yeah, he's also doing some awesome work around UX design.
Oh, that's awesome. And if anyone didn't know, Sacha did make the climbing wall that's behind him.
Yes, but it's not for me, it's for my son, who's 2 years old.
Oh my goodness. So I was actually pondering, do you know off the top of your head how many countries were represented in the survey? I was trying to find that.
I think it's written somewhere. Let me check.
That's a lot. I was amazed.
137.
That's amazing to me. And Eli said all of them.
No. Sadly, not yet. And that's also, like, so I live in Japan. I'm really like disappointed that I wasn't able to reach to more Japanese developers, and that's on me, because I'm not super embedded in the local community, since I do most of my work in English. But Japan, China, there's India, there's still like huge populations that we haven't done a great job reaching out to. But yeah, this year I want to shout out to Alexei, who's helped us a ton translating into Russian, and as a result, we did see a measurable bump in the number of Russian respondents. So that was really encouraging. Like he's done like he's not only translated into Russian, but he was fixing typos in other language that he doesn't even speak, I think. So yeah, we really have awesome volunteers.
That's wonderful.
Man, as someone who only speaks English, I'm always jealous of people that can do that are not only fluent, but like super capable in multiple languages. I don't know. I'm jealous.
Yeah, it's definitely nice. Like, but it's not always easy, because so I'm French, and when I had to translate some of my English content into French, I found it to be a huge struggle just because I'm so out of practice writing in French. So,
well, I imagine too, like this is not just like you're writing in a different language, but it's also with these technical terms too, right? So it's not like the common, you're not translating like simple preschooler stories into another language. It's fairly in-depth to do. So it's a non-trivial effort.
well, the hard part, especially, is you don't know if you should leave those terms in English or translate them into French, right? So
yeah,
like, I don't know how to say front end in French. Because I guess people just say, front end. They say the English word, but then you start to wonder,
yeah,
like,
yeah, this is hard enough to write in one language.
yeah, it's like when English people use French terms like déjà vu. Like, am I supposed to pronounce it the English way or the French way? Because it's totally different.
Wait, how do you say déjà vu the French way? I need to know.
Déjà vu.
Oh, okay, I love
Déjà
it.
vu. Yeah.
So, but we actually have some guests backstage that I would love to bring on. But before we do, there was one thing I wanted to touch on, and it was the fact that you are not just trying to conquer the JavaScript community and world and representing them now in survey form, but also the CSS community. Was this this was the first year for the State of CSS? Am I right?
Yeah, I don't want to use the word conquer because I feel that's gonna.
Represent with love.
Yeah, represent. Offer my services too. I think more humble, maybe.
Okay, so now there's a State of CSS
Yeah,
survey.
yeah. We've done it for 2 years.
Okay, so this was the second year.
Yeah,
That's
it was the second year.
awesome.
Yeah, I mean, CSS. I don't know. It always seems silly to me that there's this ongoing debate about CSS and JavaScript as if they were like opposed, where, you can't really, well, you can use CSS without JavaScript, but the other way around is a lot harder. And I think some people see the CSS and JS, trend as JS trying to replace CSS, but in fact, it's more like just another way to organize your CSS. It's more like a different architecture than anything else. So yeah, I mean, CSS, JavaScript, it's all front end for me. And eventually, we actually want to expand. So the whole idea behind having this over-engineered, like macro service-based platform with lots of moving parts is to make it reusable for other surveys. So we're hoping eventually all that work pays off in the form of being able to run a React survey, a GraphQL survey, a survey about climbing walls. I don't know.
Survey as a service. Yeah.
Yeah, a survey about surveys. Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, more surveys are coming, hopefully.
Awesome.
Well, so are we ready to welcome our other guests of honor? Is there anything else you wanted to cover, Sacha, before we do?
No, I'm excited to hear what they have to say.
I think we're ready. Why don't we go ahead and bring everybody in? Let's make it a party here. So I'm going to start adding people, and then we can do a little bit of roundtable introductions here.
Hey.
Hey.
So welcome to the stage, Kent C. Dodds, Sarah Drasner, and Josh Comeau.
Hey, hi, thanks.
Hi.
Hi. I think there was a typo on, I don't remember which website or post it was, but Trent C. Dodds is now trending.
Yeah, that's on me.
That's all right.
I'm not sure if it's my fault or the autocorrect, but yeah, someone pointed that out, and hopefully it's fixed now, I think.
Oh, it had me chuckling last night when I saw that. I was like, oh, good old Trent C. Dodds.
So why don't we start by giving everybody a chance to introduce themselves, and I'll just go by the order the boxes show up here on my screen. So Kent, you want to go first?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Kent C. Dodds, and I am a software engineer. I've been a full-time teacher for the last 2 years. It's been awesome. I created epicreact.dev and testingjavascript.com, and I blog at kentcdodds.com. I'm also on YouTube and a lot of other, I have a Discord. That's where I hang out a lot of the time too. So it's a good time.
Very cool. Sarah?
Hi, I'm Sarah Drasner. I am also a software engineer. I am VP of Developer Experience at Netlify. I also work on staff at CSS Tricks, and I also am a Vue core team member.
Very cool. And Josh?
Hi, I'm Josh. I'm a developer up in Montreal, Canada. Until recently, I worked as a staff software engineer at Gatsby, and I left to pursue my own thing. So I'm also trying to follow in some of the footsteps of the previous two people and do some online education.
Well, very cool. So I think what I'm going to do here is I've got the survey sort of ready here, so I can toss this up on the screen. And at this point, I'm just sort of curious what, I mean, we've got some smart people here on the stream, what everybody thinks. If there are any sort of things we want to get started with talking with? Anybody want to grab the floor to get us started?
Yeah, I mean, I think overall there weren't too many things that were super surprising if you've been in the JavaScript community for a while, which is a good sign of a survey like this. You don't really probably want things to be like, oh no, the community's headed in a completely different direction. There were some really interesting things that showed up in some of the opinions and other tools thing that I can't wait to discuss with y'all. I'm not sure if we're kind of going through that all, but my general idea of when I looked through it was nothing really was shocking. So that's probably good.
Yeah, I have to agree with Sarah's analysis and don't have too much more to add either.
Gotcha. Well, I mean, if that's the case, we could start. How do we want to tackle this? Do we want to start going through? Does anybody have any spots that, in chat, feel free to chime in here too, if there's anything you want us to focus on or talk about. Sacha, I'd also be curious if you had any sort of things that most interested you from the survey results.
It's hard to say. Like, I feel like I'm so familiar with them that I don't really have, after a while, it's just like colors and numbers to me. Like, I don't even know what it means. But we'll probably get to it later. But I think a big trend is Svelte. Like, that's, to me, if I had to pick one thing this year, that would probably be it. And I guess also TypeScript, but that was already the trend last year. So it's not really new.
Yeah, the Svelte thing was the thing that actually was, I was wondering if we were going to get to that later. That was the thing that probably jumped out at me the most, was like the just huge popularity. I have some theories about that, but I'm not sure we're getting into that quite yet. I did want to give Sacha kudos, because I think that the animation and visualization and graphics this time around, I know it's always constantly improving, but I was really impressed with the level of attention to detail there, and also the ability to see trends over time really improved over the past few years.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, seriously, I don't know how you come up with the graphs for these things. Like you have obviously a silly amount of data to represent, and finding a way to represent it in a way that allows us to infer the reality and get the facts out of it. I can't even imagine the challenge that you're up against there. It's really impressive.
Yeah, that's actually the most fun part of the process, probably, is figuring out how to display the data, which chart to use, how to set it up, animate it. So that's once we've done all the data collection, setting up the API and all that, that's like the really fun part that we enjoy the most, I would say.
It's a really good argument for the idea that like details matter. Like, I know for myself, I spent so much more time going through it just because I was having fun with it as a product. So I learned more from it because of the fact that it was so well designed.
Can I just say, Josh, your blog has been a huge inspiration for that. Like a lot of the little animations, the hints with the light bulb, that I didn't copy. I don't know if I copied code from you, but this is the
I appreciate
your animations is there. But we don't have little beeps and boops yet, like you.
Yeah, that's down for next year.
I love Josh's website. Anybody who's not gone to Josh's website needs to go. And Sarah, your website's awesome too. It's, what does it say? I make things and I wreck things or something.
Yeah, like if you hover over it, it's got a kind of a D3JS thing going on, and then if you hover on it, it breaks.
That is so cool. Oh man, I love that.
Josh and I both have a similar love of animation. It's a joint.
Can we stop speaking about the survey and just look at those websites?
Well, I'm going to just say, like, why don't we start with frameworks? I have to imagine, actually, Sasha, I'm curious if like you have stats on like what's the thing people look at the most. Because if I had to guess, this is like probably the headlining chart that most people go to. But I'm curious if you see that on your end as well.
Oh, that's a good question. I do have Google Analytics, which I could check later. Yeah, I assume that's definitely the most shared, I think. And I mean, that was the original reason, going back to what we were talking about before, why we created the survey was like, I wanted to figure out if I should use React or Vue or Angular. And so that front end section, I think of it as the core of the survey. Yeah. And that's also one of the most competitive areas. I think that's where you have the most alternatives. And if you look, we have a new chart right now this year on the technologies page. It's called the cardinality chart. I don't know if you can.
You're going to help me find that.
On the main, like if you go up one level in the sidebar, yeah. If you go down a little bit, we can talk about that chart and this one as well.
Yeah, why don't you explain to me what's going on here first?
Let's go down to the. I just want to finish my point. So if you go down all the way back down to the bottom of the page, okay.
Yeah.
That chart shows you how many people use one front-end framework, two front-end frameworks, three, and you can see that the majority is like bottom heavy. So most people will only use one, unlike, say, testing build tools, which are more, spread out. So
interesting.
So what I mean by that is that it's more competitive, probably. Like few people will use more than two front-end frameworks. For that reason, I think it's especially important that we can help people make their choice when they wonder about which one to use.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that another reason that something like testing or build tools might be more like center heavy, I guess, if we're talking that way, is that like lots of times these tools don't really handle everything that you need. So like for testing, for example, you have testing library that will take care of lots of the stuff that you're going to do, but it's not going to run your tests for you. And it's not going to like give you a framework for you either. And so you can't really use it by itself. Whereas with React, it's not very common for you to use React and Svelte in the same application or even in the same agency. So that might help explain some of that too.
Yeah, I was actually like, if we're going to go into the, the differences on some of those charts, I was kind of wondering if some is when you start to use something in your spare time and you're like really excited about it, and it's just like this shiny new toy that you're working with and you're just like so jazzed about it. And Svelte is obviously awesome. Like I love working with Svelte too. But then when you have to work with something for a job, then you come across all of the intricacies of any time it can fail. And so then it's not like you don't like it anymore. It's just you're more acquainted with like all of the things, but you're not in like limerence with the framework anymore. You're kind of like, well, I love it and it's really great for all of my use cases, but I really wish it did that one thing, which you're not really going to see when you're diving in for smaller projects.
Yeah, and I'd be curious because I mean, Svelte is definitely one of the things that jumped out to me. I'd be curious everybody's take on, is Svelte for real? Is this hype? Is this early on? Like for people that are just sort of casually deciding what should I use for my next app, like what sort of advice everybody here would have for those type of people?
I mean, all frameworks started there though, right? Like, so, I mean, I think it's it's tempting to say like, oh yeah, like people don't really use Svelte except for New York Times. But I think React, when React started, I was trying to get buy-in at Zillow to use it, and people were like, oh, it's a hype, like it won't last and things like that. And then Vue too, like I feel like I've seen this happen a few times before. So I just want to caution that we might feel like that now and not feel like that in the future.
I also just think that like there's no wrong answers. Like all of the framework, we're spoiled for choice now, right? Like all of these tools are fantastic, and none of them are going anywhere. In the same way that like there's still Angular 1 apps in production. So like I don't really think, I mean, I think that it's totally valid to wonder like which of these is the best option. But I also think that you're not likely to regret your choice with the tools that we have now.
I agree. And there's one chart. This is kind of touching back on what Sarah is saying, but on the technologies, under features technologies, on the technologies homepage, whatever, it has that chart there. And what I find interesting about this is that most of the technologies are following a very similar trajectory, where it's bottom to the left, going up to the right, and then circling back over up and to the left again, where it's like, it starts out, nobody really knows much about it. Maybe some people have tried it a little bit, have negative feelings toward it. And then it just slowly, people get excited about it and they're positive feelings, and more people know. And then honeymoon phase ends and it starts moving over to the left again. This happens, except TypeScript. That one's kind of unique. People just seem to love TypeScript. And myself as well. I really love TypeScript. But yeah, a lot of the technologies kind of follow that trend. And then just in general on Svelte or really any of these, I really like what Josh said. We're spoiled by choice. These are not bad options. They all have different trade-offs that they make and things like that. But like, you're going to be able to build 99% of the sorts of apps that you need to build, and it's going to be a reasonably great experience with any of the front runners that we have now. So I think it's a nice, for those of us who have been around for 5 or 6 years or so, like that was kind of rough back then. It's a lot. I mean, there's still, you can't just throw up an index HTML file on a CDN and expect to be able to build the sorts of things that Josh is building for his website or whatever. But we've got a lot of really great options. I'm happy about that.
Actually, I was curious from Sacha, what is the meaning of the color here? Does that have a?
Oh yeah. It's so basically it's the velocity. So red means, it's actually tricky to explain. Well, the way it's calculated is you compare the starting year and the end year, and then the more to the right and upwards it is, the redder it is, and then other way around is blue. So it basically means negative versus positive. Red is positive, blue is negative, if that makes sense. But yeah, it's the difference in position between the start and the end of each line.
One of these that kind of surprises me a little bit is Webpack. Not because I don't think that it's not a great tool, but I just hear people complaining about Webpack so much, and maybe it's just my bubble. I don't know, but I was pretty surprised how far over to the right it was on this particular graph.
And actually, we could maybe jump there, because speaking of choices, I know personally I got to this page and went, whoa, like I had to stop for a good minute or two and parse what I was seeing there, because I mean, this chart used to be just Webpack's territory, right? And now it's like an absolute cluster of just all sorts of options that people have. So I'm curious what everybody here makes of this one too.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing about Webpack is it's used by almost everybody, but configured probably by very few developers nowadays, because a lot of if you use Create React App, for example, it does that for you. So you're using Webpack, but you're not fussing with it the way that you would have to do if we go back a few years. In terms of all of the different options here, I also wonder that I've played with 2 or 3 of these, and other than Webpack, which I have some experience with. So I'm very excited with all the developments, but I wonder how wide they're going to reach unless other tools adopt them as their underlying engines.
Yeah, I guess in thinking through that, when I saw this, I was wondering what will happen next year with Vite, which is what Evan is working on for Vue and VuePress and VitePress and things, kind of like an underlying mechanism that's similar to Snowpack and some of these other ones. It hasn't really, he just created it, so it's not into full adoption phase. And also, take with a grain of salt, I'm a Vue core team member, so I'm keenly aware of Vite in a way that other people might not be. But I think it's really interesting, and so I do wonder if that starts to become more of a standard. However, I completely agree with Josh that if you have something that's already configured by Webpack, the chances that most developers, unless you're at a really big company and you are like really digging into that config quite often, a lot of people are like setting and forgetting it. And I think some of the positive reactions to Webpack is like, man, I've just never had to touch it. That's great.
Yeah.
It's made my life easier. And people who have had to configure it, to Kent's point, will probably talk through some pain points. I think things have gotten a little bit better over time, but it is a little bit challenging to work with it at that deeper level. So I wonder if that's like another level of this data viz that we might want to explore in the following years, is like, what's your favorite build tool? Have you actually worked with the configuration?
Right.
I think also like you have to keep in mind those opinions are subjective. So people might love Webpack, but then something else comes along and you realize, oh, actually there's a better way to do it. And their opinion of Webpack can go down a little bit. So I haven't used, Snowpack, ESBuild, but it's possible that the people who did use those builders are actually now reevaluating what they think about Webpack.
Actually, Sacha, quick question for you, especially for a category like this where there's a lot of options. How do you decide like what makes the cutoff for being included in the survey, for I guess for both being included and for being dropped off at some point as well?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we try to limit each category to 10 items. So because otherwise the charts just get too big. So every year we have a discussion to know what to include. We have an open GitHub thread where people can give us their feedback. We look at stats on like Best of JS, which aggregates the GitHub stars, popularity, and stats. What else do we do? Yeah, that's also, of course, we look at the write-in mention. So if you scroll down, there's like other build tools question. Yeah. And Vite is number one. So we'll probably include Vite next year just because it came first in that question. And yeah, we just do the best we can with that, juggling all those factors. I don't know. I wonder if we could define like an algorithm that gives us a set of guidelines which we can use every year. But so far we haven't found something that really works, because it's not just, we don't want to just feature the 10 most popular or whatever. First of all, we don't want to really focus too much on tools that aren't, that might be losing ground or so I was talking about Backbone, for example. There's no point in featuring something where we know the opinion won't be that positive and it won't be that helpful. And of course we could be wrong about that, but I think there's always some examples where it's clear that, okay, we can like deprecate that tool, so to speak. And then also sometimes there's an up and coming library that we actually really want to feature. So I think Svelte was like that for us last year, where Svelte didn't necessarily have the same numbers as other front-end frameworks, but we could already tell it was going to be big. And so we wanted to have that ability to do historical comparisons by already featuring it last year.
Very cool. Any other thoughts on build tools? Anything else people want to give a special like mention to or note of with this?
And there was a question in chat about from Eat More Kimchi. I wonder what their opinion is for new or newer web developers who want to get into the industry, which technology to learn first. So I know we had already discussed earlier, and I really loved how you all summed up that none of these are the best because they each do their own thing. But is there, for beginners, is there advice from any of you?
I will say, like, there's nothing you can't do in each one of them. So I don't want you to get the feeling of FOMO of like, if I pick this one, then I've only learned one true way or something like that. I think that what ends up happening sometimes is people get like really anxious, which is understandable because their livelihoods are connected to which technologies they learn and so on and so forth. But I don't want people to feel like they have to pick one and they're screwed to learn something else or something like that. I do also think that if it's possible to time box a little bit of time to several different things. Sometimes people don't have that time, so I'm caveating a little bit. It can actually help you understand the decisions that were made in either, so that you're like, oh, I see, what I'm getting over here is one thing, what I'm getting over here is another one. Not everybody has that time, so another possibility is to look for the jobs that you're interested in getting and seeing what technologies they're using, like what their tech stack is, and going in that direction. Because I do want to be respectful towards, like, if you can't pay your bills and you're trying to get a job, like, just learn what you need to do those things.
I would also say that I started learning React probably in 2015, I want to say. And before that, I had been learning Angular, and I was getting nowhere. Like, I was spinning my wheels. I was frustrated with it. And with React, it just clicked. And I'm not to say that React is better, but just like for my own style of learning, I had a much easier time with it. So I do think if you pick any of these frameworks, and for whatever reason you're finding it to be a bit of a slog, it's not clicking with you, try another one, and maybe you'll have more success just understanding the concepts. And I think, actually, to Sarah's point as well, like, once you get comfortable with one, it gets so much easier to move between them that you might actually save time overall. If you're having trouble with one, try another. And then if, like, for example, the one that you had started with was the one that had all the jobs in your area, it may actually not be a bad idea to learn a different one and then come back to it and kind of take those ideas with you.
Yeah, I'd say you'd be surprised how much transfers, because I spent a big part of my career working on Backbone, which we've been kind of using as the example of a framework that's fallen off throughout this stream. But I mean, through Backbone, I learned a lot of features of JavaScript. I learned about just different ways that templating works. And I think because I saw how Backbone did it, I had more appreciation for how libraries like Angular and React approach the view layer, because I could say, oh, well, I see how this was done in Backbone, and I'm familiar with that. Well, this is like that, but just a bit nicer. So some of the knowledge transfers, so you don't have to feel like you're necessarily making the wrong decision, I don't think, by choosing any of them.
Yeah, I was going to say that all things being equal, you just choose the most popular one and you'll find the job. But all things are not equal, because to Josh's point, one of them might not click for you. Being able to differentiate yourself from other engineers, also, like, there's a lot to be said for being the one who understands this particular technology. So I often say, like what Sarah said, you look at the jobs that you want to have, find out what they're using, and go and try and learn that, and then do what Josh said. If it doesn't click for you, then try something else. And there are jobs for all of these things. Even Svelte, even though, like, Svelte has a really, on this chart, it had a really high satisfaction rating. But if you look at the usage, its usage is pretty low. But even for Svelte, you're going to find a job if you have some experience with that. So it's, yeah, you can't make a wrong choice, other than, like, I'm learning this and I hate it, I guess maybe is a wrong choice.
And actually in COVID times, maybe even more so, right? Because it used to be like, oh, but there's no jobs in my area. I feel like people are much more open to remote work. So, I mean, to Kent's point, you might be able to find a job in whichever framework you're interested in. Yeah, I mean, Vue definitely steals, borrows, changes things from other frameworks as well. So you'll see things that are comparable from Vue, from Backbone, from Angular, from React as well. So I don't think that they all just operate in silos either. There's a lot of things that people are sharing and learning from each other too. So, and one last thing I'll say on the subject is, when you're starting web development, it feels very daunting, because it's just like driving a car, where at first you're thinking about shifting gears and putting on the clutch and steering the wheel and things like that. But over time, these things do become second nature. So I don't want you to feel like when you're first working on something and you're struggling a little bit, that it will stay that way. You will eventually get to a point where it's very fluent to you and it doesn't feel like that anymore.
Well, awesome. So I think what I'm going to do, we've spent some time on front-end frameworks. Why don't we, just keeping an eye on the clock here, what I'll do is I'll head to some of the major sections of the survey so we can discuss. And if people strongly want to see something either on the panel or the chat, feel free to yell at me and I can bring up anything specific. But we've talked about TypeScript and JavaScript flavors a little bit. So why don't I bring this up so we can talk about it? Because I know when I look at this, the numbers, like, it's crazy to me that the numbers can even keep going up with TypeScript. So I'm curious what everybody
I
thinks
know
about
that
that.
as an Angular dev, TypeScript is used. Like that's the way you do it. Is that true with the other frameworks? Like, or
It's not true that you need to do it with Vue, but Vue was just rewritten from the ground up with TypeScript so that it could be fully compatible on every level with TypeScript. So you have your choice. You can work with Vue with or without TypeScript, but it's not a blocker. So it is a piece of the framework. And if you know TypeScript and you are looking through the Vue code base, that can certainly help, right? Like if you're like, what happened here, and you know TypeScript, then you can understand what that piece of Vue core is doing.
Real quick, show of hands on the panel. How many people here would prefer using TypeScript in new projects, sort of regardless of technology? So I see, looks like.
I'm trying to raise my foot.
I just
And
get
100%.
I just get a this from Josh.
Yeah, start dancing. Yeah, in my opinion, I feel like it depends on the scope, and like if it's a toy project that I'm just like fiddling around with, then I'm not going to add it because it adds too much friction at first. But if it's like something I plan on maintaining in the long haul, then absolutely I'm going to do it. I think that it definitely like can save you a lot of grief and trouble. But there is that, in my opinion at least, that initial cost of like, everything just takes a little bit longer.
Well, I use TypeScript, but I just write any everywhere. I don't know if that counts.
You can put it on your resume though, so that's the important thing, right?
Have any of you tried alternatives like that are listed here? I haven't tried like PureScript or Reason. I did once get preached to about Elm. That was
Yeah,
weird.
well, if you look at the usage tab there, you'll find that like those are not very widely used. I did Hello World in Reason, and I did Hello World in Elm, but yeah, I just keep on coming back to JavaScript and TypeScript.
I actually really enjoy Elm. I don't use it on projects with other people at all because there are times where it can not compile correctly if everything isn't like in exactly perfect configuration. So if you're helping someone debug, you can spend more time helping them debug than actually writing Elm. But when Elm works, I think it's fantastic and wonderful, and it's very interesting. Like it's an incredibly interesting project. TypeScript obviously has all of the adoption, and I also think that I used to work at Microsoft and I'm friends with some of the PMs and engineers for TypeScript. It's a very humble team of people who are really listening to people's feedback. And I think that that's part of what makes it really good. So for bigger projects, for things that you have to maintain for a long time, TypeScript makes a lot of sense. And also the team has a keen eye to listening to how to improve. But yeah, just like Josh said, if it's a personal project or something smaller, I wouldn't use TypeScript necessarily because you can sometimes just move much more quickly and you don't necessarily need it for smaller projects. Or that's my opinion.
Can I say I was actually surprised that Elm Reason didn't show a better progression over the years. Like initially, they had a really high satisfaction ratio, and looking at things like Svelte, like we talked about, I would have predicted that they would be more popular today than they actually are. And yeah, I kind of wonder why that didn't really catch on as much as it looked like it would.
Cool. Well, any other thoughts on JavaScript flavors? You can scroll down through some of this if anybody has anything else. CoffeeScript still has a few fans out there. If not, I think the next one, we did front-end frameworks, we went through there. So I think the next one up would be the data layer. And this is definitely not my area of expertise. So I'm curious if someone here has strong feelings about this one that they want to bring up.
This is a bit of a weird category because it mixes a lot of different things, like GraphQL is not a library. Apollo client obviously uses GraphQL. So it's kind of a catch-all category for that domain. I think in the future, we might split it out into other surveys. Like if we did a state of React, probably state management would have its own category there, and we might refactor that a little bit. But I still think it's interesting. For example, Redux is losing popularity a little bit. And that's been my experience with Redux as well. Like, I know the team is doing really excellent work now, but it went through a phase where the complexity kind of caught up with it, I think. Like, or maybe its initial popularity, was overtook its complexity in a way where people who didn't really need it were using it, and then they started feeling like, well, maybe I don't need that. So I found it interesting to see what was going on with that trend.
Yeah, I think the thing that's weird about it is that like Redux kind of feels, I mean, actually it's based on the same architecture as Elm, and both of them were kind of really hot at a certain amount of time and have kind of faded a little bit. Elm has dropped in terms of usage, but Redux is like a flat line. Like if you go to usage, it's exactly the same number that it was. And I think that and maybe it is just a bunch of people started using it a long time ago and it's too much work to migrate off of it. But I feel like there is a bit of a, like how people think about it versus what it's like in the real world. Like I'm sure there's just a bunch of people that aren't on Twitter that are just happily going along with Redux, because I still really like Redux.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Also, like, yeah, to your point, it's not one-to-one. Like I would say for Vuex, you might want to compare like Vuex, MobX, and composition API and see what's going on there. And then like, yeah, the GraphQL and Apollo client one made me scratch my head a little bit because it's not like an either. The way that the data is presented does make it look more like an either or. And I actually am using Vuex with GraphQL, and so like I was like, it might make sense to break it out more per framework. Like I wouldn't ever use Vuex with Redux, but I would use Apollo with Vuex or something.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest one for this one. And in addition, I think my impression is that frameworks other than React kind of have the state management story pretty well like sorted. They have like a baked in solution and then a handful of different ones that people will use on occasion. And others of you can maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but I know in the React community at least, state management is a very hot topic. It's always been a hot topic, and I expect it will continue to be a hot topic for a long time, where people just don't agree on the one true way, which of course there never will be one true way, which is why I think it'll always be an interesting subject. But so like breaking this one up, or this particular topic up into maybe framework specific and just finding another way to represent this one will come out with some interesting results, I'm sure.
Yeah, that's tricky actually, because Vuex is Vue specific. Redux is not React specific, I don't think, but it's mainly used within React apps. So it's always a struggle for us. Like, if there's a really popular, and it will be the same for backend with Next.js and Gatsby. If there's a really popular like React library, do we feature it because it's popular, or do we leave it out because it's not the state of React, right? It's state of JS. So I'm sure there's like a Svelte backend frameworks or state management libraries that we could feature, but so this year we added Vuex because it is popular, even though it is specific to a library, but that's something we haven't quite figured out how to best handle. Yeah.
I mean, my initial gut reaction is like, just accept it all. If it exists in the community, put it there. But I'm assuming the reason is the survey would be unfill-outable because it would be just so big. Is that the reason for like having a limit of 10 per category and things like that, and as well as making charts for them in graphs?
Yeah, both of these. And also, like, if we just went again by popularity, probably the survey would be very, very React focused, like even more, because that's what's popular right now. So we don't want to, we want to give everybody their chance and not just have the React stuff in there.
Yeah, I also wonder if like incorporating what you've used helps too, because what I've noticed too is like I have heard people say that they don't like Redux and they never tried it. And so then that gets into weird territory of like, okay, so you saw someone say on Twitter that they don't like Redux and now you don't like Redux, but you actually have no experience in Redux. I don't know. There's some like more final piece.
It would be interesting, like if you haven't used it, your opinions don't count here forth, and like to see the results, how they differ, because that is interesting, like that you can vote against something that you've never used. So
yeah, so
I think it's reasonable to say like I haven't used it, but I'm not interested in learning it. Yeah, but that is an interesting like. I can definitely see somebody saying, I haven't used it, but a lot of people tell me that it's no good, so I don't like it.
One last thing I wanted to call out, and I think it really shows with the usage tab of this, is GraphQL is growing. Like that's a pretty steady growth, and also Apollo client, which again, kind of similar, growing as well. I'm curious, are you all GraphQL fans? Who all here is in on the GraphQL train? See a couple shoulder shrugs, a couple yeses.
I'm full on GraphQL train.
Yeah.
I love it in theory. I've never enjoyed working with it. I always find that in my and it's possible it's just like it's like how people will grab Redux for like a Hello World React app and just say like, oh, this is too much work for the benefit I'm getting. It could be that kind of a thing. Like maybe I'm just not using it in the right ways. I know that it's heavily used in Gatsby, and in that it's always like, just let me hit a REST API, or let me like structure my data in, like, I don't want to have to type all my data and then have it come in this giant nested structure that I have to like unwrap. It just seems like more friction than it's worth. But I also recognize that there's plenty of use cases that I just don't have for it.
Yeah, I think it's I really like GraphQL, yeah, like itself, but then it can be misused or used in places where it's not needed. And I think Gatsby, so Gatsby has a whole GraphQL API, internal ways of dealing with GraphQL data, and we have a Gatsby site that uses GraphQL data but doesn't use any of those APIs, because it's actually easier to just load all the data, during build, and then pass it directly to the components as props rather than query it through GraphQL itself. And so that's an example where GraphQL is great to query the data from the API, but then within your Gatsby site, like, it's never really made sense to me why you would need to again write another GraphQL query. So I don't think it's GraphQL's fault, but it's more like how you use it.
I think that the reason, and I mean, I used to work for Gatsby, so I should like raise my bias right up front. The really cool thing about it is that it gives you a unified data layer. So you might have data in like 3 or 4 different sources, and now you can get them all with one query, and it's all structured in kind of the same way. And that's awesome. I've never had more than one data source. So it's always just a lot more trouble than it's worth in those cases.
Yeah, I was actually kind of wondering if it was because of the Gatsby background, just like Sacha said, like if it was because of the Gatsby background. I do feel like Gatsby uses GraphQL just for everything in a way that can give you a different taste in your mouth. One thing I do really like about some of the Apollo with GraphQL things is the tooling has gotten really spectacular. And so that is a bit of a game changer for me, right? Like when you are able to, debug on a finite level. I'm not sure if anybody has used Hasura here, but some of the ways that they incorporate the GraphQL tooling just directly in the way that you're kind of creating and sculpting pieces is super helpful, and it gives everything right at your fingertips. And I think if you're dealing with it on like the API composition side, that's been game changing.
Yeah, we have a public GraphQL API where you can actually explore the data through the graphical explorer, and that's super cool. But yeah, I think maybe it's good to make a distinction between GraphQL more at the infrastructure level to power tools like Hasura, and like maybe I think we'll start seeing like tools that kind of abstract it a little bit more and make it easier to deal with it rather than having to really write complex queries like it's currently the case.
Well, cool. We have chat really wants to hear about next.js, so I'm going to go ahead and comply with chat here and switch over to the backend frameworks. We need to switch over anyways. So Next is at the top of this list. This is another one where I mean, personally, I feel like these choices are coming out of nowhere, and all of a sudden there's 6 or 7 different options for building these things. So I guess I'll open the floor to the panel again. Everybody's thoughts on these frameworks, and Chad definitely wants to hear about Next.js. So curious what people think about it.
I really like Next. So I'm building my own course platform now, and I'm doing that in Next. And it's just been delightful. It's wonderful. It's so nice just to be able to essentially just like mix in the little bit of backend that you need. So maybe you need an API route, or maybe you have locally stored data and you need to just like do some node file management, just like in the same file as your component. It's great. I love it.
Yeah, I mean, I have a whole integrations engineering department devoted to making sure that Next is smooth on Netlify, because we really enjoy working with Next. And we really think that there's a lot of amazing things happening with the types of tooling that you can do. Especially, it's kind of set the landscape on fire in terms of SSGs, I would say. Like Nuxt is really, taken up a lot of things from Next. I really love Nuxt, and I think that some of the ways that both of them are using these different rendering models and understanding how you can make dynamic pages really quickly from data without kind of stepping out of the kind of component level understanding that you are coming from, so that you're not kind of like completely moving away from the way that you're building everything else, is really appealing. So I would also say that if you're interested in Next, to check out Nuxt, or if you're interested in Nuxt, to check out Next, because they borrow from each other so much that it's kind of cool to see how those configs match and don't match, and where different decisions are laying out. But yeah, it's super interesting, and I think that it's definitely changing a lot of pieces of the landscape as it does.
For me, I used Next the first time years ago when I was needing a website for Glamorous, my open source project, and you can still see it. It's at glamorous.rocks, and it's I did 100% like a static export. So that was like right when they barely added that feature to do static site generation. And I just remember being blown away by how fast it was, when it's just HTML files. Yeah, so I was really impressed with Next, and I spent some time over with Gatsby, and now I'm actually, if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see my pick is Remix, which wasn't even on this at all. I wrote it in, but I guess it didn't make it in. But yeah, Remix is really exciting. I can't wait for Remix to get 1.0. There's actually a release that they're working on in the next day or two that I just can't wait for. They're following a lot of the similar things to Next, but kind of embracing progressive enhancement as a core feature that I'm really looking forward to. So yeah, cool stuff around what's coming up with Remix. And I think that one of the big criticisms of React in particular is all of the choices that you have to make when you want to build a React app. Yeah. And over the last 5 years, we've slowly been chipping away at those choices with these meta frameworks, where you don't need to make those decisions anymore because the thing that satisfies the 95% use case has been selected for you, and you can move on. And lots of other frameworks have those kind of baked in already. React never really had that, and so having these meta frameworks built on top of React, I think is really critical, and it's awesome that we're getting that.
I think Next is also interesting to look at in the context of like the Jamstack movement, because I feel like as an industry, we're really predictable, where we'll do one thing and then the complete opposite, and then finally settle on like the middle ground. So at one point, everything was SPA, single page applications, right? APIs, and then everything was static site Jamstack. And now Next.js is kind of in the middle, where it gives you the ability to either do completely static or dynamic, or kind of a mix of both. And that really feels...
I will also say though that Jamstack is never supposed to be fully static, right? It's supposed to be you pre-build as much as you can and pre-compile for the user as much as you can, and then you add dynamic functionality on top. So that the definition of Jamstack is really more towards like, let's see how much of this work we can do up front, and towards the progressive enhancement stuff. That it's kind of like the principle of least power, of like, what can we do as much as possible to make sure that that content is as close to the user as we can ahead of time, and then add dynamic functionality. So it's not, I think that that's something that we have to clarify more and more this year, that like Jamstack, it does not equal static. It means figuring out what can be static and then adding in dynamic functionality. So Next is definitely a Jamstack framework, I would say.
Yeah, I agree. But at the same time, like what I would say is that I don't think anybody was really focusing on that part before Next. Like I feel they're the ones who are actually taking on the challenge of, okay, how do we integrate these non-static parts like in the right way? Whereas before it was more, you have your static part and then the dynamic part is up to you. You do whatever you want in your JavaScript. So that I guess that's why I was thinking about when I said that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, to me, the lines between the client, what is the client and what is the server, are kind of blurring. And you see that with like React server components now, which is kind of related to like what Next is with server-side rendering, kind of not. And I feel like we have a lot more tools to solve some of these problems. And I think that's one of the reasons why you see all of these lists in here, because they're, at least to me, they're all like different permutations or different ways of solving kind of a somewhat similar problem.
Yeah, also it's interesting to see this really new framework called Express. When did that come out?
It's amazing, the staying power of Express. But like, I'll be honest, if I'm not going to go with a framework for one reason or another, I'm absolutely using Express. Like it's just the foregone conclusion. It's older, but man, it's good. I really like Express. I'm happy with it anytime I use it.
Yeah, look at these usage numbers. I mean, I didn't even realize this, but Express is still, we're spending a lot of our time talking about these, but Express is still way ahead in terms of people actually deploying apps with.
Yeah. I wanted to just touch on Gatsby as well. And the thing that is occurring to me more and more over the years, and I should say this is my opinion as an independent person and not as a former Gatsby employee. I don't want to speak for the company, but I kind of feel like Gatsby came out of the React ecosystem because it uses React, and a bunch of React developers jumped on it. And I don't think it's necessarily perfectly aligned with that. I think that where Gatsby is really going is after like the WordPress community, which is like 10 times larger than everything we're talking about.
Yeah.
And there's all these agencies that are doing all these really cool things with Gatsby that are just like, it's in a totally different pocket of the universe. So I do think that, you look at these numbers and Gatsby's kind of like, you can see it on this downwards trajectory. I don't know about that. I think that it's definitely true that that's how it seems from the JavaScript ecosystem, but I'd be surprised. Like, I think that there's more to the story there.
Well, cool. Real quick shout out, because I'm about to move out to testing here. I'll just note that here at Progress, we are giving away a few prizes if you're watching. So I see Sarah just dropped the link in the chat. So if you're interested in that, make sure to fill that out.
Backstage, and Sacha mentioned something about wanting to give away some t-shirts, and chat was actually mentioning how cool your t-shirts are. So we might throw out a couple of t-shirts with our prize list as well if you want, Sacha.
Yeah. For sure. Let's give out 2 t-shirts.
Cool.
And I'll also mention that if you have any questions too in chat that you want to run by the panel, feel free to drop those in. You asked for us to talk about Next.js, and I brought that up. So feel free to chime in. But I do want to make sure we get to testing, because I think that's the next one on our list here. So I'd be curious here. I'll just open the floor again to the panel here of who wants to take a stab at this one, because there's, again, no shortage of things to talk about. Kent, you might maybe want to start with us here. I don't know.
Yeah, so I was really honored and pleased about this one. So for those watching who don't know, I'm the author of Testing Library, which is kind of a funny name for something like this. So I think I talked to Sacha last year and said, hey, why wasn't Testing Library included? And he said, well, it's kind of a weird one to put, because it's like, well, yeah, sure, I use a testing library. But yeah, so I think it's pretty well known now. But people seem to be really happy with it, and that was just, it warms my heart. If you look at the usage, it's actually still pretty low, and but I expect this to continue to grow quite a bit because it is not framework specific. And so regardless of the framework you're using, as long as your UI is in the DOM, and even if it's not, because you can use it with React Native, as long as you're building a UI, then you can use testing library. So I expect the usage to go up. But yeah, people seem to be pretty happy with it. There are that 3%, and I'm pretty sure I've talked to every single person in that 3% who aren't happy with it, because they spare no pains in letting me know how unhappy they are with it. But yeah, it seems to have gone pretty well. What's interesting about this one too is that like lots of these you're going to be using together. Like I use Jest and Cypress and testing library, and Storybook. So yeah, like there's a lot of overlap with these different tools that you end up kind of using for different purposes because they kind of serve different purposes.
Yeah, I thought the Storybook one was interesting because I've been spending a lot of my time more recently looking into like component libraries, design systems sort of thing. It's more of a trending topic, and seeing that jumping up is a little bit interesting to me just to see more people interested in that space.
It is kind of, this is another one where it's kind of interesting because Storybook doesn't take the place of some of these other tools. So it's kind of, you know, like use Storybook and Cypress at Netlify. And so it's, I mean, it doesn't have to be necessarily, but it's just, I thought, I saw that and thought like, oh yeah, I guess Storybook is kind of testing, but I don't think of it in like the traditional like testing way. Maybe that's just me.
No, right there with you. And I honestly expect it to like double in popularity, at least from like the Angular community. I feel like everybody's talking about it, but.
Any other libraries on here worth? I know for me personally, I've used, and it's just largely because it ships with Create React App. It's one that I haven't thought too much about. Is there anything else that people want to call out here? Any other questions in chat at all?
I'll just say that I've been using Cypress recently, and it's fantastic. I discovered it probably a little bit, like maybe a year and a half ago, and thought it was cool. But I've really gotten into it this year, and it's really cool. It's a really great end-to-end testing tool that gives you a bunch of like nice UI for managing the fact that tests run in a browser. So, shout out to that.
Yeah, for real. I've always said that I'm Jest for my unit and integration, and then Cypress for my end-to-end. I'm actually starting to think that I'm going to start moving some of my integration tests over to Cypress. Maybe not all of them, but one of the big reasons that I go with Jest over Cypress is because Jest has an amazing watch mode interactive experience there, and it's parallelizes all of your tests, and it's super fast. But Cypress, you have to like boot the whole browser up and all of that stuff, and it runs only one at a time. You can make it go in parallel, but then you do all this complicated stuff to make that work. But it's a real browser, and you get to look at what you're testing, and so there are a lot of benefits there too. So I also think that Cypress is going to continue to climb in popularity, at least in my own work for sure. But yeah, wherever you go though, you have a testing library there. So there is a Cypress testing library as well. So it's fun to use that there too.
And the chat is mentioning Enzyme and how they're pondering why it's not in there and why it didn't make the top 10. Perhaps they're saying maybe because it's a React specific, but I didn't know if anyone knew about
Enzyme.
Enzyme.
Yeah, that's why it's React specific, and it was dropping in popularity a little bit according to other to GitHub stars and other stats. So we didn't feature it this year.
It was written in quite a bit though.
Enzyme, I will look. Yeah, decent number of write-ins. All right. So
I guess one last thing on the Enzyme thing. Even the creators of Enzyme have moved over to testing library now. So Enzyme, as much as it might have gotten mentioned and whatever, it is on the way down. The React team is saying use testing library. It's really, I know that there's that 3% of people who don't like testing library. They're all using Enzyme. There will always be people who are using Enzyme, and there are great people who are maintaining it and everything. But it really is testing library is the de facto standard now. And so I can see that just continuing in that direction.
All right, well, we've got like maybe 20 minutes or so left here. So are there any features, does anybody want me to jump to a specific section here that you want me to call out? Because I know we haven't gotten much into the JavaScript features, so we could go into browser APIs. We can go into some of like the other tools or the opinions. Does anybody have like something that they really think is important for us to show and talk about?
The opinions is pretty interesting.
Yeah, let's do that. Which opinion in particular? I know there was one thing at the bottom that I thought was kind of fascinating.
Well, I mean, I think all of these are really interesting. The one that jumped out to me the most was building JavaScript apps is overly complex right now, because I feel like there's like two sides of that, right? One of them is, yeah, if I think back to, I'm neckbeardy, so if I think back to olden days of like building things that didn't have to know as many things as you do today. However, because we have so many meta frameworks, so many like, base configs for things, I wonder about this one, especially because it feels like we have better abstractions for things that become complex over time. So like maybe that's not true for something that's simple. If you're working on something that's simple, you're like, why are there all these things? But if you're dealing with something that's very complicated, in a lot of ways, we've made really good abstractions for the really complicated scenarios. So I'd be curious I wish that there was a way to dive in even further and kind of understand what kind of projects they're working on. I know you had another part of the survey that was like how big their company is and things like that. It might be interesting to do some like cross correlation. I don't know. I'm not a data analyst, so but to see some of those cross corollaries.
Yeah, it is interesting because it looks like disagree and disagree strongly both went up a bit. Because I know that was for the longest time, especially for a few years, I think that was the constant. That was like the if you were going to make a meme joke, if you were starting a meme joke account on Twitter, you just talk about how JavaScript apps are way too crazy and you get JavaScript fatigue with all these new things and that sort of thing. So hopefully we're starting to turn that around just a little bit.
I would guess that what we were talking about earlier with all the meta frameworks that have kind of taken the configuration out of the equation, that yeah, it is surprisingly straightforward now to jump and launch a tool that has all of the bells and whistles you would need that you don't have to configure and don't even really have to know about until you run into the problems that they solve. But I think that, you're always going to have people who do think it's overly complex because it is complex. Like it's hard to learn all this stuff.
Yeah, I think that when somebody's coming in and they're just going to build a little toy project for their pet or something, like they clearly they don't need a big framework. Like they could literally write the whole thing in an index HTML. But what do they see when they go to Google, how do I build a web app or whatever? They're going to see the complicated stuff because like for most of us, we're not doing this just for the fun of it. Like we're doing it for a job, and the job isn't going to get paid unless you're building something complex, a complicated thing. And so when they come and they say, oh man, I've got to do all this junk. If there was some way for us to say, hey, welcome to this new community of things, pick your adventure. Like what are you going to be working on?
Yeah.
And like there's a surprising number of apps that you could build in an index HTML. Like so many things, like your toy projects and everything. You could literally just script tags and a couple of things, like so easy to do that relative to everything else that we're doing. But nobody jumps in that direction for a couple of reasons. Like maybe they really do want to learn the complex stuff. And if that's the case, then, well, they're asking for it. And if it's, no, I just want to throw this thing together. It's not like what I'm trying to accomplish. I just want to get something on the web. Well, then they're just missing the simple solutions for the simple problems because most of us are doing complex things and that require more complex solutions.
It's like when you go to Wikipedia for just about anything, and like I just want like a simple explanation, and there's math formulas. It's the wrong audience, right? It's not what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Yeah, use case specific makes a lot of sense. I think also what users expect of JavaScript applications has changed a lot over the years, right? Like way back when, it's like, we want content. Okay, here's some content. But as we kind of create things that need to solve more complex UX, UI, like people want dynamic solutions that cover all sorts of different types of bases. And, if you're talking about a doc site, maybe that does mean just like content that's readily available for the user as quickly as we possibly can. But when we start to get into like e-commerce solutions, things like that, that's when the user expectation gets much more complicated depending on their actions. And I mean, anybody should probably feel a little bit of trepidation to putting their credit card online. You get into security things, you get into all sorts of like, what happens when you're waiting for something. So some of the complexity is necessary because of laws of physics and time and things that we have to solve for, while the user has an expectation that they're going to be given some information while they're waiting for things too.
Completely
and
agree.
hopefully the meta frameworks can continue in this direction of making it easier. But like even installing something, like you have to have Node installed on your machine, like that's a huge amount of complexity that we didn't have. And it's not for all of us, we're like, install Node, like whatever. But like for a lot of people, they're like, Notepad, can I just like open up Notepad and throw things in there? So there's a level of like, are you doing something ultra simple? You're not? Then here, have the whole world, like install your npm node modules. Like there's not a whole lot in between. And I think that's actually part of the target audience of Gatsby, I believe, is that they want to get those people who, and this is a lot of the WordPress folks too, is just like, I want to have a thing on the web, but I don't want to have to install all of this stuff. So just install this thing on some server, give me some sort of UI. And I that's the direction I would go if I were Gatsby, is to have some sort of like, you don't even need to install this thing. It's all backed on Gatsby. And I kind of think that's something that's needed. That's a open area in the web development world, I think.
They should totally make gpanel instead of cpanel.
Yeah.
That's an interesting thought from chat. Could it be that VS Code is actually responsible for the shift of it feels less complex?
Well, we should bring up the VS Code numbers, actually.
I know, right?
Actually, Sacha, you'll have to help me. Where is VS? Oh, I found it.
Right there. Yeah.
Yeah. Because this was absolutely nuts to me as well. Just like, I know VS Code is popular, but the sheer scale of it is kind of crazy.
And also, can we give Vim a round of applause? Like he's number 2. I love it.
All those people who can't edit or exit their editor, they open it at 2016, and they have to answer that they use it because they were never able to close it.
It is kind of surprising to me, and I don't know why I'm surprised, because I am very much in this cohort, but people get attached to their editors, and the fact that so many people migrated, right? Like I used to use Sublime Text 2, and I was very, very happy with it. And so it's wild to me that we've had that transformation where just so many people have migrated, despite it being it's like the main tool that you use. Like, it's where you spend all your time as a developer. So it is, whatever they've done, it's kind of remarkable.
It's weird because I used to be a Sublime user and I was very happy with it, and I migrated as well. And it was like, almost felt like a gradual process, but now like I'm fully converted. I drank the Kool-Aid.
I will not admit to you how long it took me to give up Atom. I was sold. I was sold.
Atom was great too.
Yeah, I think it's nice to also be using the same thing as everybody else. Like there's the plugin ecosystem. It's easier to find answers to your issues. You can do like a remote sessions and stuff like that because the other person is also using VS Code. So there's like network effects. I think that play a role too.
And there's a poll real quick going in chat too, just to quickly chime in. If you want to vote on whether you're using VS Code, you can chime in there.
Yeah, I think that the part of the appeal of VS Code for me was really this like ecosystem of other things, right? I have a whole bunch of plugins and themes and snippets packages and browser extension packages that I've made now, in part because when I switched to a new machine, I want to have all of those things. So I was like, I should just open source them because I'm very open source driven. But also, like, it helps that you can just kind of switch things out quite easily. It also gives you kind of a spectrum from an IDE, right? It used to be that it was like text editor that's just plain to all the way to an IDE. Code kind of has like a sliding scale in between those two, whereas like you could just leave it to text editor-ness, but you could also super pimp it out and customize it to like finite, capabilities, and that super appeals to me. Also, just as the VS Code live share, like when that came out, a friend of mine was giving a talk on that and asked me to participate from afar, and I put in photos of him with a no over his face, Burke Holland. I don't know if you know him. And he was like working with a React app, and I instantiated Vue inside of it. So that was cool.
Oh, wait, were they on stage when this makes it even better?
So trolling capabilities with VS Code are quite high.
I also recently, in case I'm seeing like 91% so far in the poll. It's not finished yet, so vote if you haven't. I'm very curious about our chat and what you use, but I recently discovered the screencast mode that you can toggle for like if you're like teaching something or you're live sharing, and it'll like automatically show like what keys you're typing and hotkeys and things, and it's just really crazy useful. I was like, oh, this is built in. So there's quite a bit there, but you're so right, Sarah. It's like hidden away. You don't have to like install or enable it if you don't want it. But yeah, it's very powerful.
Yeah, there's a guy named Brian Clark who puts out these kind of like what's new in VS Code every month. So if you're interested in, he does these cute little videos. Anyway, I like them. And they kind of go through some of the newer features that VS Code is putting out.
That was Brian Clark, you said?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
And can I just say that I am just amazed at the fact that VS Code and so many of these other apps are built in web technologies. Like, isn't that the coolest thing ever? I just think that's amazing. It's moments like that when I'm thinking about stuff like this, and I'm like, yeah, I chose right. JavaScript is where it's at. You can do everything in JavaScript, even build editors. And I just like it's so fast. It's outrageously fast. Yeah, I love the web and love that it's capable of making stuff like this.
Yeah, can you go back to opinions, because I wanted to highlight something that Kent kind of just touched on, and it was the next question in the lineup, and I didn't understand why it's ever been a question.
Which one? Overused or I enjoy? Overused?
No,
okay.
Overused. Like, I guess I don't. How could you overuse JavaScript?
I think the context is that like, and I'd be curious, Sasha, you can tell me if this is right or not. But the idea is that like for a lot of relatively static websites, they don't need to be bloated with giant JavaScript bundles. So I guess the idea is that we're making users pay the cost of our like foolish endeavors by sprinkling way more JavaScript than it needs, right? Like a chef with all the salt. That's how I interpret that question, but maybe I'm not getting it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when I came up with that question, I was thinking of sites, news sites or whatever, where you just want to read an article, but you have to load like megabytes of JavaScript for some reason. And then the fact that, I mean, back in, I guess, 2016, it was maybe peak single page application, where things that before would have been like Rails or Laravel apps, now you have to, load a ton of JavaScript that errors out and then nothing works. And that was before, we had TypeScript and kind of better, like more solid frameworks and meta frameworks. So yeah, and I think the trend that you see here kind of reflects that. Like it's fairly stable, but overall people don't really agree that JavaScript is overused online, which is good.
Well, we're coming up here on our time, so I'm going to say sort of two last things. First of all, we'll put this out as like a last call. If you want to get in on the prize drawing, let's drop the link one last time to the prizes here in chat. So if you want to enter for that, this will be your last chance to do that because we'll pick those momentarily. And then I'll also throw a last call out to our panel. Is there anything, so we're coming close to the end here. Did we miss anything important? Is there anything that I really need to like showcase or highlight or we need to chat about that we're missing?
Maybe we can finish with the awards.
Oh, yeah.
Cool feature.
Oh, actually, I'd be curious what was the inspiration behind this too, because I think this has been a part of your surveys kind of from the beginning, hasn't it?
Not the beginning, maybe 2018 or 19.
Okay. Because it's kind of cool, like a fun little animation.
That's so fun.
Yeah, I don't remember what the inspiration was, to be honest. I think we wanted to, the survey is very data-driven. It's a lot of, just stats, and we wanted to have something a bit more fun, a bit more, also more narrative in a way, where it's like, okay, we don't just show you raw data, but I actually kind of highlight some of the things that's really stood out to us. So yeah, it's not a chart, but it's still a way to kind of make sense of the data.
Hey, testing library.
Yay.
Woohoo! That was a happy thing to see.
I think we've done pretty good on the stream though, because we talked this through. We got TypeScript. We talked about Next. We talked through the testing options. See if we've covered these things. GraphQL. That's sort of interesting. I can kind of see that though, because I can see people kind of curious about it, but maybe not able to deploy that to their actual company's infrastructure. So it might be a thing that you're more curious about, but can't actually try out. At least that would be my hunch.
I think that sounds right. That your backend doesn't use GraphQL, so you have all this envy of all your friends that are able to use it.
The cool kids are doing it.
Yeah.
And most write-ins. Ooh.
IntelliJ.
Yeah. Nice.
Interesting.
34 write-ins.
And there's Veet down there too.
Mm.
Well, awesome. Well, this has been a lot of fun, I think.
And I appreciate you all so much for taking time out of your days/nights to be a part of this. It means so much to me. My main goal is to spread JavaScript joy, and I believe we have accomplished such on the stream. So thank you so much. I wanted to take time to highlight each of your picks, and we can start with Kent because I know we talked about it. And it even received the most beautiful award, testing library. And so we have links that will be going out. Nightbot is posting in the chat. So as we go through these picks, if you're interested in them, click on them. They're right there. And then Sarah, what was your pick?
My pick was Insomnia. I think probably a lot of people are familiar with Postman. It's fairly similar to Postman, but there's a lot of really kind of nice UX touches in Insomnia that's made me start to use it a little bit more. And I think some of the really nice pieces are the simplicity of it. If you're just trying to test something really quickly, you don't have to you can kind of throw things at it really fast. It's very simple. The reason why they called it Insomnia is because it was originally just a REST API design. So the puns work better with REST, but I use it for GraphQL quite often, and it does have GraphQL support.
It just makes me think of this cookie place called Insomnia. They're open 24/7 and they serve hot cookies. So I'm right there with REST. That's cute too. Josh, what was yours?
Yeah, I'd like to +1 the Insomnia recommendation. Actually, I'm friends with the person who created it initially. He's also, he lived in Montreal at the time, Greg Shire. Fantastic tool. My pick was, and I never know how to pronounce this, if it's A11Y or ally.coffee. It's a resource that gives you all of the introductory information you need for accessibility. And it's something that I've known was important for a very long time. It's kind of hit home for me a little bit this year because I spent a few months on disability, not really able to use a keyboard the way that I normally would or a mouse. So I have now firsthand experience with the frustrations of not being a mouse and keyboard user. And so I encourage everyone to learn a little bit more about that stuff and how to make sure that the stuff that we're building is accessible.
Was that a pun? First-hand experience?
Oh, so I got a repetitive stress injury. Essentially just probably spending too much time on a computer and also too much aggressive beat sabering. But
I
yeah,
also wanted to mention that I work with the person who made that, and you made her day by saying that in the survey.
Did you see that? You both know each other's picks.
Fun.
Sasha, I think you gave me a pick. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, my pick was Best of JS, bestofjs.org. So it's a site also run by a French JavaScript developer who lives in Japan. One more, and so it's a bit different. It's like he crawls GitHub every day basically and aggregates stats about JavaScript project stars, and then you get this super useful visualization of the popularity of different projects in different categories. So it really helps us, for example, when we want to figure out which testing libraries are, popular, we can go there and get a snapshot. And of course, stars are not the only metric, but it's still like a good proxy. So yeah, they just came out with Rising Stars, which is their yearly overview of the JavaScript projects which accumulated the most GitHub stars over the past year. And that's also super interesting because State of JS is more about projects that are already established, but Rising Stars really show you the up and coming stuff.
Very cool. Awesome pick. I love it. TJ, I know you had one.
I do. So my pick is a program I do called React Wednesdays. So if you enjoyed this stream at all, this format, sort of the inspiration behind this is we do a lot of these things here at Progress on the Code It Live channel. And one of the things I run is a weekly chat show called React Wednesdays, where basically I have a guest on every week and I have them more or less share their screen and teach me something. So it's kind of nice for me because I just get to get smart people to come tell me about something that I don't know. And so if you enjoy that, if you enjoy this format, it's kind of fun because you can get the chat involved. It's more of a hangout atmosphere where you can bring any questions you want. So if you're interested, if you enjoyed this, check it out.
Yeah, mine is kind of piggybacking on TJ's. It's just our Code It Live channel that our DevRels use. All this week, I have been doing a Signal R stream with a bunch of people from the .NET world, learning Signal R and .NET because I've never touched anything. So why not dive in with the deep end? So but all the time we're on here doing a bunch of different fun streams, so check us out. And really just thank you so much, audience, for being here and being the community that we love.
Can I do one last thing really quick?
Yeah,
do it.
Okay, so I just when I was asked for what my pick was, it was hard for me to decide. So no, you're good, because I already said Remix was my pick, so it's fine. But it was hard for me to decide. I just want to say the other two. So the other one is React Query. I know a lot of people love that. That'll probably be on the survey next year. It's definitely a rising star. It's a great project. And Tanner Lindsley is a great person also. And then MSW is another big one that I think will probably be on the survey next year because it's taking the world by storm. It's awesome. So if you haven't heard of MSW, go check it out. It is fantastic.
So we just plopped Remix in there. I'm going to try to find links real quick to those other two.
Cool. Tanner will be on React Wednesdays in February to talk about React Query too. So we've got some nice crossovers going here too. It's almost like we prepared this.
Thank you all so much for your time and for being here and sharing opinions and things. We appreciate you so much.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun.
I really appreciate it. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Bye everybody.